Look at this fort. It doesn't look very big. It certainly doesn't look like El Morro. It doesn't look like San Cristobal. But for centuries, if an enemy wanted to capture San Juan from the east, this little fort was standing directly in the way. Francis Drake attacked the defenses right here. The Earl of Cumberland came through this area. The Dutch threatened it. And in 1797, thousands of British troops came to Puerto Rico determined to capture San Juan. They couldn't get past this defensive line. But that's only part of the story, because this little fort has also survived earthquakes, hurricanes, the end of the Spanish Empire in Puerto Rico, a bizarre 1999 year lease, years of abandonment, and the modern development that surrounds it. And when we're finished, we're walking that way to drink a piña colada at the Caribe Hilton, one of the places that claims to have invented it. This is Fortín San Jerónimo del Boquerón, and its story is much bigger than it looks. For centuries, 3 European powers attacking San Juan: cannons, militia, privateers, empires, a forgotten museum, and one of Puerto Rico's most famous cocktails, all within a few minutes' walk. Hello everybody, welcome back to another Chronicles and Cocktails episode. I'm Josue, and today we are in San Juan, Puerto Rico. But we're not going to the old city itself, to the center of the city. Today we're visiting the fort that gets nowhere near the attention that all the other forts receive, even though its history stretches back more than 400 years. The airplane. The official name is Fortín San Jerónimo del Boquerón. And before we get into battles, pirates, and invasions, there is one thing we need to understand. Why would anybody build a fort right here? But before we continue, remember to watch last week's episode. It's a 2-part series on the plane, the Clipper Endeavor, and when it crashed just off the coast of Old San Juan. And remember, like, share, and subscribe. Subscribe. You're helping the channel every time you subscribe. So thank you to all of those that have subscribed in the last few weeks. And thank you to our members. Now, let's go back to El Fortín San Jerónimo del Boquerón. Since the 16th century, the islet of San Juan was of great strategic importance, for it held the entrance to the port of San Juan, one of the most important ports of the Americas. Okay, so this is where it's getting interesting. The walled city of San Juan had several levels of protection outside its walls that were known as lines of defenses. Now, I'm taking this information, well, of course, from what I've studied and from what I know, but there are historical markers throughout the old city. And one of them says that the first line of defense, so called because it was the first that enemies approaching by land would encounter. Now remember, behind me, it's already a separate island. That's the big island of Puerto Rico. Actually, that over there in the back, that's Santurce, which is an island by itself. So the islet of San Juan it's separate from the islet of Puerto Rico and the islet of Santurce. And also it says here, it ran, the first line of defense, it ran along the extreme eastern edge of the San Juan islet and compromised various defensive elements built at different times. So today we're going to focus on Fortín San Jerónimo, and that is where we're heading now. To understand San Jerónimo, forget the building for a moment. Look at the geography. San Juan sits on an islet, and for centuries, that geography was one of its greatest defenses. To the north, the Atlantic. To the south, San Juan Bay. And here, on the eastern side, narrow passages connected the city with the rest of Puerto Rico. That created a problem. El Morro could protect the entrance to San Juan Bay from the west. But what happened if an enemy landed somewhere else and attacked San Juan from the east? This became one of the answers. Look around. That's really the secret to San Jerónimo. Water there, San Juan to my left, and anybody coming from the east had a limited number of ways through. So this fort wasn't important because it was huge. It was important because somebody put it exactly in the right place. The military importance of this spot was recognized very early. In a report from 1587, Governor Diego Menéndez Valdés described fortifications at Punta del Boquerón. His plan included an artillery platform and trenches designed to protect what he described as the second entrance to the harbor, and to prevent an enemy from landing on the islet of San Juan. This wasn't yet the stone fort we're walking through today. These were much simpler defensive works. But Menéndez Valdés understood the geography. And interestingly, some of those eastern defensive works were later demolished. That decision would not age particularly well. And this is one of those moments in history where somebody has an idea. Somebody else comes along and says, "We don't need that." And then the enemy shows up. Actually, several enemies. The first name almost everybody recognizes is Francis Drake, one of England's most famous naval commanders and one of Spain's most hated enemies, arrives in Puerto Rico. During the attack, the defenses at El Boquerón and the nearby San Antonio crossing were reportedly defended by around 150 soldiers and 4 cannons, part of a larger defensive force protecting the eastern side of the islet. And the defenses worked. Drake failed to capture San Juan. Imagine standing right here, looking at the horizon, and realizing that Francis Drake is somewhere out there. No radio, no radar, no reinforcements flying in. Just a cannon, soldiers, and whatever defenses you've managed to build. And they stopped him. And that's not all. 3 years later, the English returned. They don't give up, man. This time, Sir George Clifford, the Earl of Cumberland.
And Cumberland succeeded where Drake had failed. He attacked San Juan by land. Contemporary accounts describe fortified positions around El Boquerón and San Antonio, but the defenses suffered severe damage. English forces broke through and occupied San Juan. For a brief moment, Puerto Rico was in English hands. But Cumberland's victory came with a problem no cannon could solve. Disease devastated his forces. The English eventually abandoned San Juan. The city returned to Spanish control, but the lesson was impossible to ignore. The eastern defenses had to be strengthened.
After Cumberland's attack, the fortification was rebuilt. Governor Gabriel de Rojas reconstructed the position beginning in 1608, and in 1609 it received the name we still use today, Fortín San Jerónimo del Boquerón. And notice, San Jerónimo with a J. You'll see San Jerónimo written all over the place, but the historical name is San Jerónimo del Boquerón.
And the saint's name wasn't merely decorative. Spanish fortifications were frequently given religious names. In an empire where religion, monarchy, and warfare were deeply intertwined, placing a fort under the name of a saint carried both spiritual and political meaning. And San Jerónimo would need all the protection it could get, because another European power was coming.
In 1625, another enemy appeared, this time the Dutch.
In 1625, a Dutch fleet under Boudewijn Hendricks attacked Puerto Rico. Spanish authorities had not forgotten what Cumberland had accomplished. Governor Juan de Haro considered Punta del Boquerón so important that 2 artillery pieces were transferred from El Morro to reinforce the position. Trenches were prepared. Troops were stationed here. The Dutch managed to enter San Juan and even occupy parts of the city, but they could not capture El Morro. Eventually, they withdrew. Once again, San Juan survived.
You know, there's a pattern here. English, English again, Dutch, different commanders, different countries, but everybody keeps worrying about this little corner of Puerto Rico. That tells you more about its importance than almost anything I can say.
This wasn't one construction project completed on a single date. It was repaired, expanded, damaged, and modified repeatedly. A powder magazine and a guardhouse were added. Military engineers continued strengthening the position. Then, in 1787, a major earthquake damaged the fortifications. More repairs followed. Historical sources disagree on some of the precise completion dates of the late 18th century works. But by the 1790s, Spanish military authorities were still improving San Jerónimo. And that timing couldn't have been better, because Puerto Rico was about to face the battle that would define this place forever.
And that's important, because sometimes when we visit an old fort, we imagine it as one thing. Built on this date, finished on that date. But that's not really what happened here. San Jerónimo evolved. Every year, every attack, every earthquake taught somebody something, and the fort changed with it. And it's closed because they're renovating it. That's what they're saying. Someone that works in the hotels over here actually told me that it's been a year since they've seen anybody working this area, which is a shame if they're not working on it, because it's such a historical landmark that we need to preserve it. And now we get to the reason this little fort became famous. This time, the British weren't coming for raid. They were coming to invade Puerto Rico. They brought thousands of soldiers, a huge fleet, and two very experienced commanders. And the road into San Juan led right toward San Jeronimo. And we've talked about this in the episode about the British attack of 1797. And after this episode, go check that one out, because it's very interesting, and it connects with this episode and Fortín San Jerónimo. The naval expedition was commanded by Admiral Sir Henry Harvey. The army was led by Lieutenant General Ralph Abercrombie.
In April 1997, a massive British expedition appeared off Puerto Rico. Sources disagree about the exact size and composition of the fleet. Estimates range around 60 or more vessels, which tells you something by itself. This was enormous. Thousands of British troops were prepared to land, and Puerto Rico was vulnerable. A significant portion of its regular military forces was away from the island, so the defense would depend not only on professional soldiers, but on militia, volunteers, sailors, French residents and privateers, and ordinary people.
This is probably the part of the story I like most, because when we hear British invasion, we imagine generals, uniforms, professional soldiers. But a lot of the people defending Puerto Rico weren't professional soldiers. They were people from here, militiamen, farmers, fishermen, workers, men coming from different towns all over the island, people of different races and backgrounds. And suddenly, they all had the same problem. An invading army was outside San Juan.
On April 18th, British forces landed east of San Juan, around the Cangrejos area, rather than sailing directly into the teeth of San Juan's great western fortifications. Abercrombie approached by land. Exactly the vulnerability Spanish military planners had worried about for more than 2 centuries. British troops advanced toward San Juan, and eventually they reached this. One of the men whose name survived was Sergeant Jose Diaz, also known as Pepe Diaz, from the municipality of Toalta. He became one of the best-known figures associated with the defense of Puerto Rico in 1797. Puerto Rican volunteers conducted raids and nighttime operations against British positions. Pepe Diaz was killed during the fighting. Later, generations would remember him as one of Puerto Rico's early military heroes.
I always think history becomes more interesting when we stop looking only at kings, governors, and generals. Somewhere in all those official reports, there's always an ordinary person who actually had to stand here and fight.
The British understood that they could not simply ignore San Jeronimo. They established batteries around Condado and nearby elevations and began hammering the defensive positions. The bombardment was relentless. Pedro Tomás de Córdoba later described the defenders desperately repairing the damage. The British fire opened exposed sections of the fort. Commander Teodomiro del Toro ordered sacks and barrels filled with sand to cover vulnerable areas. Sand was placed over roofs to reduce damage caused by bombs and grenades. Imagine the routine: bombardment, damage, repair, more bombardment, more repair, and somewhere inside all of that, you still have to fight.
The enemy is literally knocking pieces of it down around you. So you fill sacks with sand, repair what you can, put the cannon back into position, and keep fighting, man. This fort was being destroyed while it was still being defended.
Spanish naval forces also supported the defense. Floating batteries and vessels fired against the British positions. The narrow channels and waterways made movement difficult, and Spanish engineers had another trick. According to historical accounts, more than 100 mines were exploded among the rocks between San Jeronimo and Condado, creating additional obstacles intended to prevent enemy vessels from passing through.
Listen, the defenders also manipulated the landscape itself. Historical accounts claim that more than 100 explosive mines were detonated among the rocks between San Jeronimo and Condado that way. The purpose was to create obstacles that would make it more difficult for the enemy vessels to pass through the channel. I mean, imagine that. Even the rocks and water became part of the defensive system. So, El Fortín San Jerónimo, right? And this over here is Condado. This right here is the rocks channel in the bay. Some of what you're looking at here isn't simply scenery. The battle itself was altered to make it harder for the British to get through. The bombardment continued through the end of April, imagine that, but the British couldn't force the breakthrough they needed.
For nearly 2 weeks, the British tried. San Juan remained under fire, but the defenders held. The British could not break through the eastern defensive line. On April 30, the bombardment ended, and on May 2nd, 1797, Harvey's fleet lifted the blockade and sailed away. The British invasion had failed.
Did San Jerónimo single-handedly save Puerto Rico? No. And I don't think we need to exaggerate the history to make it impressive. This victory belonged to an entire defensive system. Spanish soldiers, Puerto Rican militia, local volunteers, sailors, French allies, and ordinary people. But San Jerónimo was one of the critical points. And when the British needed this position to fall, it didn't.
The bombardment left San Jeronimo badly damaged. Reconstruction followed in the years immediately after the invasion. The fort continued to evolve during the 19th century as military technology changed, but the world around it was changing even faster. During the Spanish-American War in 1898, San Jeronimo remained an active military position. It was commanded by Puerto Rican Captain Policarpio Echevarria. 2 officers and 51 soldiers of the Principado de Asturias battalion were stationed here. But by then, San Jeronimo's weapons belonged to another age. It reportedly had only 2 useful old bronze cannons. Spain lost the war. Puerto Rico passed to the United States, and after more than 3 centuries defending Spanish San Juan, San Jeronimo entered a completely different chapter. In 1899, Hurricane San Ciriaco destroyed buildings associated with the fort. American forces later used the area, including for communications. And then, things get strange.
Okay, so we've had Francis Drake, Cumberland, the Dutch, the British invasion, earthquakes, hurricanes. Now, real estate. In 1921, U.S. Navy officer Virgil Baker obtained a lease involving the fort and surrounding property. The rent was reportedly $1, and the lease lasted 999 years. 999? Now, that is commitment. The lease involved approximately 12 acres of the San Jeronimo Naval Reservation. Baker built a private home in the area.
In 1921, U.S. Navy officer Virgil Baker obtained a lease involving San Jeronimo and surrounding federal property. The agreement and subsequent property transactions became controversial. Baker built a residence in the area. The surrounding lands eventually became deeply intertwined with development around what would become the Caribe Hilton Hotel. Puerto Rico's government later moved to recover and protect the historic fort and the surrounding property. By the late 1940s, legal proceedings and expropriation efforts were underway to secure San Jeronimo as a public historic monument. Then came one of the most important figures in Puerto Rican historic preservation, Ricardo Alegría. Under the Instituto de Cultura Puertorriqueña, San Jerónimo was restored and given a new purpose. In 1959, the fort came under the Institute's custody. Alegría envisioned something remarkable here, a museum dedicated to Puerto Rico's military and naval history. The museum opened in 1963. Visitors could see military uniforms, weapons, maps, documents, models of Spanish ships, and exhibits explaining some of Puerto Rico's most important military episodes: the attacks of Drake and Cumberland, the Dutch invasion, 1797, the Spanish-American War. For a time, the little fort that had participated in that history became the place where Puerto Ricans could learn about it.
This might be my favorite view of the entire place, because look at the contrast. 400-year military position and modern San Juan growing right around it. Hotels, apartments, cars, beaches, tourists. San Jeronimo didn't move. Puerto Rico simply changed around it. Now, let's go get a cocktail.
Because right beside San Jerónimo sits another landmark in Puerto Rican history. Not military history this time. Cocktail history. The Caribe Hilton opened in 1949 and became one of Puerto Rico's iconic hotels. And according to the hotel, 5 years later, something happened here that would eventually travel around the world.
Welcome to Caribe Bar at the Caribe Hilton.
So the Caribe Hilton claims that in 1954, bartender Ramon Mochito Marrero created the Piña Colada right here at the hotel. Now, because this is history, there is a competing story. Barrachina in Old San Juan also claims the invention of the Piña Colada. We're not solving that fight today. But I am at the Caribe Hilton. According to Hilton's own history, Marrero experimented with blended drinks until he developed the combination in 1954. The hotel's published version of the original recipe calls for 2 ounces of rum, 1 ounce of coconut cream, 1 ounce of heavy cream, 6 ounces of fresh pineapple juice, and crushed ice. Marrero reportedly served the drink here for decades, and whether you accept the Caribe Hilton claim or prefer another version of the story, the Piña Colada became unmistakably Puerto Rican.
So we've gone from 16th century artillery battery to a 20th century hotel bar without leaving this little corner of San Juan. That's why I love Puerto Rico. That's a really good piña colada. And after walking around that fort in this heat, I'm going to tell you right now, this was an excellent idea.
San Jerónimo isn't El Morro. It isn't San Cristobal. It doesn't dominate the skyline, and maybe that's exactly why it's so easy to overlook. But the size doesn't determine historical importance. Geography does. People do. And sometimes a tiny fort standing in exactly the right place can help change history.
To think that so many attacks happened in these waters because San Juan was so important, everybody else wanted it. And with it, the entire island of Puerto Rico and all the islands that belong to it. What do you think? I mean, if I only could go back just to see it, you know? I think this little section of San Juan tells the story of Puerto Rico better than people realize. Right that way, you have a fort whose history begins in the 16th century. A place connected to Drake, Cumberland, the Dutch, the invasion of 1797, Spanish rule, American rule, hurricanes, controversial development, preservation, and generations of people trying to decide what should happen to it. And then you walk a few minutes and you're sitting in a hotel bar drinking one of Puerto Rico's most famous cultural exports. One story is cannon fire, the other is rum, coconut, and pineapple. But both are Puerto Rico, and they're practically neighbors. Remember to watch the episode about the British invasion and go watch the 2-part series of the Clipper Endeavor. And of course, there are over 80 episodes out there. Thank you so much for joining me today here in beautiful San Juan, Puerto Rico. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode with somebody who loves history, travel, Puerto Rico, or just a really good piña colada. I'll see you next Sunday. Be good, be nice, have fun, get smart, read a lot, travel, go to church, and salud.